Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this LinkedIn Live event from Deloitte Legal, focused on the role of legal in AI transformation. We've all seen how the pace of development in AI continues to accelerate. And of course, in recent months, we've had the emergence of agents, which offer the promise of more complex tasks and decisions getting done with AI. The potential is getting broader all the time. And we know that organizations are very focused now on the role that AI can play in transforming their organizations, whether that's chief executives or chief legal officers. Everyone sees the potential and expects very significant change in both the short and medium term. And what we're seeing in the marketplace is a real shift from the broad range of experimentation we've seen with GenAI over the last 12 or 18 months to a much more strategic and deliberate deployment of the technology across the organization. And now is not the time for those of us in legal to be waiting. Now is the moment for legal leaders really proactively to grasp the possibilities of GenAI, both for their own teams, but also critically for their wider organizations to be ready for what's already here and what's coming. Now, in this session, what we're going to do is help general counsel and chief legal officers in a number of ways. We're going to talk about how GenAI can help their legal function and how they can help the business embrace the technology's capability. We're going to talk about the critical role that we believe the legal function has in enabling successful AI transformation across the organization. And to do that, we believe that legal needs to be a proactive business partner. And for some, that means shifting the perception in their organization that legal only needs to be brought in at the end, perhaps to sign off. We're very much focused on bringing legal in early in the process of AI transformation. And that requires legal teams to understand and anticipate what legal questions they face and how they can help shape the way forward for their organization. And so in the first part of this session, I'm delighted to introduce Richard Susskind. Professor Susskind is an incredibly well-known author and legal technology expert. He's president at the Society for Computers and Law here in the UK. And his new book is out, which talks about how to think about AI, a guide, as he says, for the perplexed. And while much of what we are going to be discussing today is about practical actions around AI, we also believe that those actions need to be framed within a longer term view. So the question of how to think about AI is, in our view, just as important as what to do with it. Shortly, I'm going to introduce some Deloitte colleagues. But before that, Richard and I are going to take the opportunity to discuss some of the thinking in his book and his point of view on what that does mean for legal functions. So Richard, thanks very much for joining us on this session. And so let's start, Richard, by talking about what we've experienced over the last few weeks and months, particularly with the arrival of agents, the emergence of the next generation of models. And what that really is driving, I think, is a greater urgency and acceleration in organizations to really get on with AI broadly, and in particular around GenAI. So it'd be really helpful, I think, in the context of your book and your thinking to give us your view on where we stand with GenAI today and what you expect to see happen over the medium term.
GenAI is really the latest development in what is an ongoing story of artificial intelligence. It's the latest chapter, it's not the first chapter, and it's certainly not the final chapter. And what's remarkable is that we need to get used to the idea that every year or so there are going to be major breakthroughs. So we're excited, rightly, about GenAI and agentic AI, but there is much more yet to come. When I've looked across what's been said from people who are specializing in AI, and I talk about this a lot in the book, there are 6 hypotheses about where AI might take us. And I'll run through these very briefly to give you a flavor. The key point is that even the AI community does not speak with a single voice about the future. The first hypothesis is the hype hypothesis, which suggests that all this chat about very advanced AI is to some extent overblown. It says that these systems are not yet reliable and will never be entirely reliable, And also, they depend on data that is irredeemably flawed and often biased. So basically, the hype hypothesis says the bubble's going to burst. These systems are superficially impressive, but actually will reach a roadblock in AI, and life will pretty much then return to normal. The second hypothesis was what I call the GenAI plus hypothesis. So we've talked about generative AI, these systems that can produce text and image and music and even generate code. And we have a view that these systems today are already useful, and that has to be right, but they aren't reliable. The GenAI plus hypothesis says in the future they will be. We won't be second guessing. We won't have humans in the loop. We'll integrate the kinds of systems we're already seeing today within our working and our social lives, and we'll find them entirely reliable. But on this thesis, that's about as far as AI will take us. So we've seen a glimpse of the future. It's not going to look wildly different in years to come, but these systems will be entirely reliable. The third hypothesis is where it gets interesting, and that's the idea of AGI, artificial general intelligence. And that's where systems basically can do all the cognitive tasks that humans can do. This might sound science fictional, but if you'd asked most people working in the development world in AI, the AI industry, say 3 years ago, when will we have AGI? Most said 20 to 40 years, if ever. Today, these same people are saying 5 to 10 years. So this idea that within 5 to 10 years, we may have systems that across all areas of human intelligence can match us, this would be one of the most remarkable developments in human history. And that's 3 of the 6 hypotheses. We're only halfway through. The fourth is called the superintelligence hypothesis, and that's where these systems become unfathomably more capable than us. And they do so because the systems themselves are involved in writing the systems. We have this kind of recursive explosion of capability. So this idea of superintelligence is not that these systems are quite good or as good as us, but they are immeasurably superior to us. Then there is the singularity hypothesis, where humans, that's organic biological humans, merge with digital technology, enhancing our consciousness, enhancing our intellectual capabilities, rewriting really the story of what it is to be human. And the final hypothesis, often put forward by cosmologists and physicists, is basically that humanity is a mere blink in the history of the 13.8 billion year universe, and that the only significant contributions humans will make in cosmic terms is to develop this superior intelligence that will in due course replace us. Now that's all very remarkable and perhaps disconcerting. A very simple way of looking at AI, however, is to say we've got short-term AI and long-term AI. Short-term AI is basically what we have today, improved, polished, and this will bring what I believe will be considerable efficiency and productivity improvements simply by automating, by computerizing what we already do today. Longer-term AI is a very different story. That's where the kinds of systems I've mentioned will actually transform the way we work, will transform our institutions, transform the nature of humanity and of civilization. And I think the big trick for all of us is to think at 2 levels. How can we make the most of this technology in the short term, and how can we plan for the long term?
And Rich, thank you. I mean, just that is quite an extended spectrum of hypotheses, a range of outcomes. I think what I think is shocking maybe for many of us is your point on AGI being maybe 5-10 years away, and just how further forward that represents compared to where we are today. So if you were a general counsel, chief legal officer today, how should you think about those hypotheses when you talk about planning for the future? What future are we planning for?
I think in the first instance, we need to distinguish between the advance of technology and the adoption of technology. And we know this well in law, don't we? That even if there are powerful technologies available, that doesn't mean they'll be embraced and used within the profession. But as a working hypothesis of my own, I believe we should assume by 2030 that we have GenAI plus, in the sense that the systems we're already enjoying and using, and to some extent experimenting with just now, will become mainstream, they'll become reliable, they'll be fully integrated into the delivery of legal services. And so this is contradicting the hype hypothesis. This is saying we will have a tool of remarkable and unprecedented power and reliability within a short number of years. And we need to plan for that. We need, it seems to me, this is important for all organizations, to encourage the use of AI by everyone, not just by a few specialists. We need to use this technology for administrative purposes, even summarizing meetings, producing PowerPoint decks, replying to emails. There are immediate uses, practical uses that we can deploy today. We need also to focus on the more advanced technologies that are used in law. There are legal applications for document review, for document drafting, and much else. So there's lots in the short term that I think in-house lawyers should be using themselves and should be expecting of their external legal advisors. The bigger and bolder claim I think I want to make is, and I choose this terminology very advisedly, is that we should plan for AGI between 2030 and 2035. And this is not just an observation about legal departments. This is for the organizations of which legal departments are part. And I say plan for, I'm not guaranteeing we'll have this technology, but so significant would its impact be, so profound would the applications of that technology be, that if not to take it seriously at this stage, seems to me would be a very serious dereliction of duty. And so we have to think through the question. What I phrase in this way in my book is, what if AGI? What would that mean for your organization, and what would it mean for the legal department? And I don't think it means a systematization and automation, tidying up, a turbocharging in the edge. It would mean for many organizations fundamental changes to the way they work. So that's my rough approach. Practical stuff to be done in the short term, and some very profound thinking and planning to be done for the longer term. And if we don't have AGI, we may have near AGI, and I don't think that thinking and planning will go to waste.
And so, in that context of short and long term thinking, maybe we could talk a bit about the legal issues here. So, there are a number of legal issues that people increasingly are understanding as it relates to the use of AGI in the use of AI in the short term. But as we shift to that longer term transition, I think we imagine that there's a broader range of issues that will emerge. Can you say a little bit about legal topics that really are both front of mind now and we expect to evolve as the technology also evolves?
My main preoccupation here is not, as others are preoccupied with, the immediate regulation of the internet and AI. It's actually whether or not our legal institutions are sufficiently equipped to deal with what we're seeing. Tech lawyers will tell you that our law runs about 10 years behind our technology. We have to rethink the way we legislate, the way we regulate. This will require new structures, new approaches. We cannot, every time a new technology emerges, be rushing back to the drawing board. Similarly, with our court systems that take many years to resolve disputes, we can't be waiting 3, 4, 5 years for the definitive decision on a new point of AI-related law. So there's a higher level issue that goes beyond the substance of the legal provisions we need. And that's about whether or not our legal system's equipped. And similarly, some of our legal concepts are looking out of date. We have discussions, intense discussions about the legality of scraping data off the web for training purposes. But isn't it interesting we do so through an 18th century lens, the lens of copyright? I think we need to rethink intellectual property law. And similarly, and go to the heart, I think, of what for me is one of the key questions: who's responsible for these AI systems when they go wrong, and who benefits from their successful widespread usage? Are we going to have to rethink the legal personality of AI systems? In normal life, we hold human beings responsible morally and legally for their actions and activities. At what stage do we think we need to do similarly with AI-based systems and robots? So the liability implications are of vital concern, but it's not clear whether or not, in some sense, the systems are responsible or to what extent humans are responsible, particularly as these systems are already performing in ways that go well beyond our comprehension. So there's a set of legal issues, of course, but within law, we have to think about the adequacy of our institutions and concepts.
And what do you think should be our orientation when thinking about AI? Because you hear a lot about the opportunity that AI represents, and as you've just described, we can also identify the real issues with this. And there are aspects of what you described that sound like a dangerous combination of iRobot on the Matrix. What's your way of encouraging us to think about this? Are you an optimist about where AI can take us, or a pessimist?
I'm both, really. And one of the messages in the book is that we have to get used to the idea of AI being of remarkable potential benefit to humanity and being a remarkable threat to humanity. I believe many of our gravest social and economic challenges, the climate change challenge, the health challenge, the poverty challenge, the access to justice challenge across the world, can and will be sorted out to some extent by AI. So the potential is phenomenal and exciting. At the same time, there are a mountain range of threats, existential threats from the weaponization, threats to our labor market where machines are taking on jobs that used to be done by humans, social challenges where there may be only a relatively few number of organizations and people who are enjoying the commercial economic benefits of these systems. So there are threats and, I believe, remarkable opportunities, which leads me to say that saving humanity with and from AI is the defining challenge of our age.
Richard, thank you, and I think that's a great place for us to transition this conversation. I think what you're saying is that for all of us, we really need to think deeply about the question of AI. And whilst there are so many things that we can practically do, and that's where we're going to move to next, it's very important that we put that in the context of where this is heading in the longer term. And so let me now introduce our fellow panelists for the balance of this session, to talk more about how we see the practical way forward for chief legal officers and general counsel in the work that they do every day and the work that we work on with them every day. So I'm delighted to be joined by my partners, Sebastiaan Terway and Mel Upton, along with our senior advisor and former Vodafone general counsel, Rosemary Martin. Thank you to all three of you for joining. And what we're going to do in this session is use a few questions really to start a debate between us about the way forward for general counsel and chief legal officers on the AI question. So let me start by asking that question about the role that they should be playing. Clearly, there are a whole range of legal challenges, legal opportunities to be addressed in the implementation of AI across enterprises, as well as the issues that come from adopting AI more specifically in the legal function. And I started by suggesting that it was important that chief legal officers were right at the center of that transformation. So I think the question for the panel is, how do we think that they should go about leading the charge? And perhaps, Rosemary, I could come to you first to kick this off.
Thanks, Richard. I think the best way that chief legal officers can lead the charge, as you put it, is to make sure they understand the technology, that they're familiar with what's already available and what might be coming down the line. I think importantly, general counsel should use the technology and let people know that they're using it. Let the people know that they're experimenting and that they are open to AI and the potential it has for us. And I think they should encourage their teams, as Richard Susskind said, to be working with AI, using it and developing their own understanding. And importantly, I think general counsel should be going out into their organizations and finding out how other functions and departments are using AI, partly so that the legal department can advise as those new AI tools are being implemented, but also to get ideas about how AI could be used in the legal function too.
To build on Rosemary's comment, But general counsels understanding the sort of AI implications. So the fact that they're actually using it themselves, I think, actually does enhance their ability to advise the business. But it can also feel a bit like drinking from a fire hose. And from a legal chief legal officer's responsibility, that risk shouldn't be a trade-off for speed. And to Richard's point, when he spoke about, okay, this is where we're going to be over the next 5 to 30 years, there is a big difference between that advanced technology and the adoption and implementation. And I think where general counsels at, or chief legal officers are at the moment, they're really trying to sort of get their head around, participate in that, make sure that they're not the no office. So many CLOs that I speak with are always very keen to be the yes people, acknowledging the risk and governance responsibilities that they have.
And just to that point on being the yes people, what are some ideas about how that can happen? How do they get themselves into a position where they can be confident about helping the business take positive decisions in the way that they adopt AI?
Yeah, Richard, happy to comment on this one. I think that if we take it one step back and we look currently at AI and we look at LLMs, what is it? It's good at text. What do we do as lawyers? We do text and we do process, right? So this is a very natural fit, I think, to our habitat of saying, right, we've got a right to play here. Then to your question on that yay sayer, if you like, I think one of the beautiful things in this space is that it's so greenfield, right? You actually have the luxury to pioneer. You've got the luxury to see and how to adapt with your teams on what the company is doing, how technology is actually developing. So what the space you actually have is, as a lawyer, you have space to, yes, make mistakes, because we don't know yet where this is going to travel. And I think it is about really that eagerness to learn and that mindset of adaptability, and then be able to document and then change course on perhaps a decision or a piece of advice you've given previously. I think that is very much the trait as a Yale lawyer. I think that is currently required, because it's changing, everything's changing, company, technology, legislation, right? You need to change and be able to adapt in your function as a lawyer and a general counsel within the enterprise.
And to your point, Sebastiaan, I think there is a really great opportunity for the CLO to really position their offering across the business and create forward-thinking policies that also wrestle with the situation that Richard rightly highlighted in terms of where the legislation is at, and the pace in which technology is advancing, and the challenge that our regulation and legislation has in keeping up with that. So I think there is a really unique in terms of that testing and utilising and making those mistakes, but learning from them, creating those policies that are actually going to be far more forward thinking.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of forward thinking and being proactive, how do you get yourself as a chief legal officer into that position? We've all experienced the challenge in technology change, and particularly in business transformation, where those leading the transformation are just wanting to get on with it. And the idea of involving legal in that is something that, at least for some of our respective colleagues, is a real challenge. And they know at some point they're going to need sign off. But we're talking here about getting legal right in at the front door and helping to design, helping to shape the way forward. How do we think chief legal officers can get themselves into that position where they are recognised as having a voice and a role up front in the way in which these transformations go forward? Do you want to pick that one up, Sebastiaan?
Yeah, sure, Richard. I think it's a little bit of a wider movement that we've seen happening over the past year, right? I think we've seen chief legal counsels, general counsels actually become right? What I would call mini CEOs, right? I think the skills of to think widely, to have that helicopter view, and actually be able to connect different dots and hover across different corporate silos, if you like. I think that is a key capability that general counsels and then lawyers within the teams have developed over the past years. I think if knowing this and knowing that actually the legal function is one of the only functions that really hovers across the organization, is what you then get is actually a really multidisciplinary mindset. So what do I mean with this? I think at first what is really important is actually to deal with technology, data, and innovation. Right, legal teams do need to see this as, right, at least in my view currently, as a very deep specialty. Right, it is a very important domain to grasp knowledge on and actually be able to think as a transformative lawyer. If you have this mindset and you're actually able to talk to different disciplines, because what is AI, right? AI is very much data. AI is platform, so infrastructure. You need to be able to talk to IT. You need to be able to talk to cyber. You need to be able to talk to data and bring those teams together to eventually also make AI work from a compliance point of view for the enterprise. And that multidisciplinary mindset, bringing multidisciplinary teams together, I think that is a unique skill that is very much ingrained in how lawyers daily operate, because we work with all disciplines in the company each day. So that is native to us. And with that, I think it's a domain where we can very naturally lead the way.
Richard, can I add here? There's an emerging field, of course, of AI ethics, and every organization is preoccupied with what it is they should and shouldn't do with AI. A number of GCs have been given the responsibility for AI ethics. I think the rest should step forward and take on that responsibility. And that's a way of becoming involved far earlier in discussions about the scope and the opportunity for AI and the limitations of AI. So if, as I believe is appropriate, general counsel become the custodians of AI ethics, that puts them at the heart of the discussion of the future of the organization and the way in which it's going to deploy AI. And then, of course, advising legal implications will follow naturally.
I agree entirely with that, Richard. And also, I think it's directly linked in terms of the CLO having a central role aligning the organizational values. So it's values and ethics. And in my discussions with general counsels and CLOs, they're increasingly not being invited, more than being invited around the table for specific agenda items, but actually they're right in the middle of the executive room, given the responsibility and the opportunity they have to drive organisational values and the ethics piece.
Rosemary, can I just ask you to comment on this? I mean, in the context of your experience in business transformation, how have you been able to get yourself to where you feel legal needs to be in the way that those transformations play out?
Yes, I do think, as Sebastiaan was saying, it's this point about the issue is across the whole of the organization. And as legal, you can get across the whole of the organization. It's your job to do so. Often there's a practical challenge that there just aren't enough lawyers to reach across a very large organization. But setting that challenge aside, I think in some ways there are parallels with what happened when data privacy laws were introduced. And I can remember the way people would just stare at you blankly because they didn't know what you were talking about when you were talking about what became GDPR and privacy law, and the importance, particularly for certain organizations, of the privacy rights of the customer and how to deal with that in a way that protects the interests of customers, but also enables the business to carry on doing its business the way that it wants to. And I think a lot of the issues in AI are rather similar. Companies are introducing AI throughout their systems, and it's often not visible at all where it is. So one of the challenges is to find the AI and understand how it's being used. And I think as a CLO, you have to get out there. You have to go and talk to colleagues in the technology departments, in other functions, to find out what they are doing and then talk with them about the issues that arise from a legal or ethical point of view, and address how they can be dealt with by the organization in a way that's in the customer's interests. And I think if you focus it around what the customers will want and expect from you as a company, and how the legal and ethical aspects of AI need to be taken into that account, then I think you've got a way into conversations that people might otherwise not want to have with you.
I think such a great point about customer focus here, and really looking at the business outcomes that the technology is driving. I think we're spending so much of our time today focused on how and what, and we really need to make sure that's balanced with where this is going and what it's going to deliver for the business from a customer perspective. You touched on the kinds of legal issues that people are starting to try and address, and maybe we could just move on to that a little bit and get some input from the panel on the kinds of legal issues that we know are already being addressed and how we expect those to evolve over time. Maybe Mel, you could kick off on this one for us.
Sure, and I think I just want to reiterate the real opportunity that CLOs have to create that sort of forward-looking policy, because when we talk about some of the potential issues, and I'll comment on the IP one, always great to avoid and not slow down the pace of change in which you're trying to drive by getting yourself into areas of potential breaches around intellectual property rights. And some of the IP issues that do come into play, who owns the outputs, the text, the images, the code generated by AI, and whether their IP protection does apply, what type of level of or human authorship has been involved. Is there an argument in terms of how co-development issues, who owns it? Was it developed in terms of co-development during your period of employment, etc.? Richard commented on the use of training data. So what are the license arrangements in place? And if the data includes copyrighted works like books, images, articles, where does that sort of sit in terms of your ability to use that material? And then there's arguments of boundaries of fair use that come into play. The other is around, and most commonly, the use of third-party content. So if AI is used to generate content that mimics or includes third-party IP, branding, logos, you may face infringement claims, and there'd be issues around copyright, trademark, and also finally sort of trade secrets and confidentiality. So obviously when it's out there, in terms of that material, you need to be very conscious in terms of the confidentiality associated with that. So that's where legal can help, and I think there is a real opportunity, not just in terms of what I mentioned around generating forward-thinking policy, but also the education piece. And Rosemary and Sebastiaan have spoken about that in terms of across the business about promoting safe use of AI tools by reference to the intellectual property position.
Yeah, and sorry, Richard. Just let me add, I think, two quick components to think about, because let me first say I fully agree with Mel. Right, there is risk here, but let indeed qualify that risk and address that risk. Whether you do that in the enterprise with the processes, with your documentation, we'll touch upon contracts in a second as well. But very much, I think it's very known by now is the challenges around privacy. And I think there are two types there, and the one that I think just really resides best is also in your personal life. Right, I've got two small kids, and they play with AI, and their friends play with AI, and they play with image generators. Right, the image they use and upload, that image is actually then moved into a different environment, and then you indeed get to the questions, right? Who does have the rights, but also what happens to that picture, and what is then the impediment on privacy for that individual that he or she actually doesn't control. That's in the personal space. If you look very much in the business space, the LLMs are trained on indeed intellectual protected data, but also quite often on personal data. They might be trained on company personal data, and there I think you need to be very worried about the boundaries you put in place, the type of data, the data classification that is needed, or what goes in, the type of data that is actually going into and being used for further training of the LLM, and then obviously who holds the rights. Secondly, is very much on information security, and there you have another component of multidisciplinary. Right? What do you talk about? Right, actually poisoning the training data. Right, there are third parties out there with bad intents that actually want to poison that training data, or that actually are after your infrastructure, or that are looking for vulnerabilities in your infrastructure to pull your corporate data on the basis of your model. Right, I think all elements to be very aware about, and then to make sure that you capture those either by, right, whether it's from the technical side by information security, or on the contractual side with either your vendors or further in the chain.
Sebastiaan, thank you. And maybe Rosemary, I could ask you to comment on the challenge of keeping up to date with what appears to be a very rapidly evolving regulatory environment for AI.
I think it really is a rapidly evolving environment around legislation and regulation. We've seen already the EU introduce the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is a very far-reaching act, and just implementing that as an organisation is no mean feat. So I think people need to concentrate on that because the act is already in force. It's being implemented this year and next. And that requires a lot of process to be introduced into companies to handle its requirements. But much more broadly than that, that's just some of the early legislation. As soon as there is legislation introduced by other countries, other jurisdictions, we'll then get into the game of trying to ensure as a multinational company, or if you're in a multinational company, that you're able to navigate through the different legal requirements of different AI laws in different jurisdictions. Again, that can be really quite a challenging thing to do. So I think there's a huge opportunity here. I think AI law will become a whole new area of expertise, rather in the way that financial services laws were all the thing in the 80s, privacy laws in the kind of mid-2000s, 2020s. AI, I think, is going to be, clearly it's here to stay. And I think people will do well to make a real part of their job to keep an eye on what's happening in the regulatory space. None of us knows what we're doing, including the regulators. So this will be a very dynamic time, I think, for everybody. And a time that CLOs and colleagues in legal teams can try to influence how the legislation is actually brought into effect to make it applicable in companies. Very often there is a bit of a gap between what the legislators would like and what is practically possible and sensible inside an organisation. And CLOs have a real role to play in helping regulators and legislators get it right in the first place.
Richard, can I add that another
Please
issue, of course, is the liability issue. I touched on this, but one only needs to sit in a self-driving car and be aware of the loss, the damage, the injury that might result from autonomous systems that are conducting themselves without intervention by humans. And so there is preoccupation right across the supply and the user industry as to who and in what way might be liable for the problems that these systems will inevitably give rise to.
So I think the message, and it's an obvious one, I guess, is that AI is very real now. It's here to stay. It's going to continue to develop. Organizations are at different stages with it, but the reality is that this is now something that's very much front and center of the agenda. So I think maybe just to bring our debate to a close, it would be great to just get some input from the group on, what General Counsel and Chief Legal Officers should be thinking about over the next few months, and maybe particularly for those who are earlier stage in their thinking, what might be the one or two things that they really should be focusing on as we move forward from here. Maybe again, Rosemary, I could start with you on this.
I think there are maybe two things people should focus on. We used to hear about IQ, and then we heard about EQ, and now people are talking about AQ, adaptability quotient. And I think that's absolutely key. Make sure that you are open-minded, curious, learning, finding out what you can about AI, and encourage your team members to do exactly the same. So that would be the first thing. The second thing, I think, is thinking about your own risk appetite in the context of AI, because that will influence how you advise your colleagues in the business. So do you think it should be heavily regulated? If so, how? Do you think it should be a free-for-all? If so, are you comfortable with that from a liability perspective? I think it's important that CLOs and legal departments talk about that amongst themselves and find their own comfort level with AI risk, because risk there certainly is, but also opportunity.
Thank you. Sebastiaan?
Yeah, let me
thoughts from
quickly
you?
echo indeed what Rosemary said on that. I think that conversation amongst GCs and legal teams, I think it's very, the point made earlier of no one knows what they're doing, I think I would translate that to everybody's very much learning. And I think there is so much indeed to learn, different organizations, different priorities, different risk appetites, but also so much happening in the legal development space, whether it's regulatory, right? The AI Act has the obligation, and the authorities have the obligation to come forward with many standards. Those standards will flow in high numbers with high complexities, right? So those conversations very much need to happen. I think the other one, and that is sometimes a little bit out of the comfort zone, I don't know, for legal counsels is, right, dare to be an entrepreneur, right? Have that entrepreneurial thinking almost on how do I help my organization adapt something that is going to be even more impactful than most likely anything we've seen over the last several years. And that requires very much an entrepreneurial mindset, in my view, right? Back to that can-do mentality. Yeah, and back there, dare to make mistakes because they will be made. Accept those, address those, learn, and move on.
Thank you. Mel, a thought from you?
I think if it's early days, one thing I would recommend is get going. And one of the opportunities is just adopting or using AI in the teams for repetitive tasks, as basic as that. And I think that is really important, just to get it happening. I think, and in a time where, and again, Richard commented on this, we are still in a period where there is 100%, I think, consensus, at least around the CLO and GC table. There should be a human in the loop. So we need to make sure we take that opportunity and really to be able to have an impact, both from that ethical, organizational value perspective, and come up with those forward-thinking policies. So use it.
And expect breakthrough. Expect breakthroughs. We shouldn't be surprised when something like DeepSeek comes along. We might be surprised about the particulars, but every 6 to 12 months now, we should be expecting some fundamental new use or technology. And this is going to be the story from here on in.
And Richard, thank you, because I think that's a great place for us to finish. And it really brings me back to something Rosemary just said about adaptability. I think right at the heart of this agenda for us is not really the technology, but the ability for senior executives, but organizations to be adaptable, to be agile, to be capable of grappling with continual change. And, I think if we've got one or two key points on which to conclude this, it's really about getting involved with the AI agenda, really understanding it. As Rosemary mentioned, just forming your own view on where this is going, your opinion, not waiting for either the organization or outsiders to figure that out. It's about making sure that legal is front and center, being proactive, thinking forward about how to help the organization more effectively make choices and decisions about what it's doing. And I think really to make sure that your legal team is getting involved directly in the use of AI. As Mel said, there are so many things that we are now seeing and working with legal teams to be successful in the way that they themselves leverage AI. And I think what we're seeing in organizations is there's no substitute for demonstrating that you're really in, and the things that you're doing yourself are very much being informed and influenced by AI. So, look, thank you very much to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to Richard for his comments early on. If you'd like to hear more about how we could help you with GenAI, please click on the link to the report below. And also, please have a look for Richard's book, How to Think About AI, A Guide for the Perplexed, which is also linked below. Thank you again for joining.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.